This episode will change how you see resilience. Hey, this is Steph, and welcome to the Together Moving Forward podcast. The podcast helping 2S LGBTQI plus people embrace self love and self respect so you can celebrate yourself with pride. By listening to this episode, you'll discover how embracing your LGBTQ identity can become a source of pride, resilience, and personal power, why representation, chosen family, and intergenerational wisdom are essential for healing and growth, how to move forward authentically even when safety, acceptance, and certainty feel out of reach. Today's conversation is about reconnecting with your LGBTQ identity, reclaiming your pride, and remembering that your existence is not just valid, it's powerful. Hello again, I'm Steph Vachon, and I'm a human being. Welcome back to the Together Moving Forward podcast. Embrace your 2S LGBTQI plus identity with pride through self love. No matter where you stand in the 2S LGBTQI plus spectrum, we are all connected. And if you ever struggle to fully love and respect yourself, you're not alone. And this podcast is here to help you. As someone who has navigated my own journey of self acceptance as a queer, I know the power of hearing voices that reflect our own experiences. In this podcast, you'll hear real stories and conversations that leave you with practical tools, fresh perspectives, and the confidence to embrace who you are with pride. To start, I need to say that I'm not a psychologist, a specialist, or someone with a college degree. I'm just a regular guy here to share with all of you and support each other. I'll share my journey, and we will all share journeys together. We'll learn from each other how to move forward. Today, I'm so grateful to welcome Joanna M. Cifredo, a nationally recognized transgender advocate, policy leader, and community organizer. Born in Puerto Rico and raised between the island and the mainland US, Joanna has dedicated her life to advancing LGBTQ visibility, trans wellness, and human rights. She has testified before the US Congress on violence against trans women, worked at the intersection of public health, policy, and advocacy, and represented Puerto Rico on international stages, including global trans pageants that center visibility and pride. Joanna's work is rooted in lived experience, intersectional identity, and a deep commitment to create safer, more affirming futures for trans communities worldwide. Joanna, thank you so much for being here with us today, and welcome to the Together Moving Forward podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. There might be, I live in a barrio, which is like a working class neighborhood where all the houses are really close together. So sometimes, because it's Puerto Rico, there'll be like a car that's driving by with reggaeton really, really loud. Or like right now, one of my neighbors on this block is cleaning their house because they're playing salsa music in the middle of the day. So I know they're cleaning. Or you'll hear like a little fight between two cats. If at any point there's like noise or whatnot, just be like, Joanna, just take a and like give me a second, and so that we could, there's moments to crop it out.
Yes, but even, I mean, it's part of life, and don't worry about it. It's all good. So you grew up in Puerto Rico and later lived in the mainland US. How did your Latina roots and your early environment shape your understanding of your identity as a trans woman?
So I grew up between Florida and Puerto Rico. Spent like a part of my childhood here and part of my childhood in Florida. I remember I grew up in a very conservative household, a very religious household. We didn't hear about trans issues because back then I'm 38, so this was the 90s. You just didn't see it that much or hear about it. Social media didn't exist, YouTube, Instagram, none of that stuff existed. The first time I had these feelings within me since early as probably 5, 6 years old, where I knew I was different, but I didn't have the language to communicate it. I was mostly bullied because I was a feminine, so I was called the F word pretty much every day of my life. or in Spanish, maricón, which is basically the same.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I was 13, I came home one day and I turned on the television, and it was this show called The Maury Povich Show, which was mostly known for paternity tests. But on occasion, they would have these episodes called Is It a Man or a Woman? Or Man or Woman?
Uh-huh.
And they would bring out these women, these trans women, and some I feel like they would bring out some cis women that I'm assuming probably worked on the crew, and that they would try to butch up a little to confuse the audience, because the trans women who would come on, they'd be super glamorous. And everyone in the audience would have a sign that on one side said manna, the other side said woman. And Maury would go around the audience and be like, so what do you think she is? You know, it's like,
Mhm.
oh, that's a man, Maury. Look at her shoulders. Are you sure? And then he'd go to someone else. That's a woman, Maury. Look at her hips. And they would publicly dissect these women. But I was so young, I didn't see the problematic nature of it. We weren't
Yeah.
woke at that time. All I saw was this one woman come out. Her name was Erica Andrews. May she rest in peace and power. She passed away in 2013. But she was this beautiful, beautiful trans Latina. She was Chicana, just gorgeous. And she revealed that she was born a boy. And that was the first time that I realized that it was possible to
Mhm.
be a woman of your own creation. Because back then, as a little kid, thinking like, oh, I want to grow up to be a woman, that's like sci-fi. Like that doesn't, like you don't see that. That doesn't
Mhm.
exist. That's not possible.
Mhm.
And when I saw her, I saw that representation, that possibility model. I didn't know how she did it. There was no book, that tells you how to become a trans woman. Yeah. I started finding my path. I knew that that was it. And I started trying to explore the early websites of trans women. And I remember 5 years later, I was 18 years old. She was coming at this point, I was living in Orlando already. And she was coming to Pulse, the club where the shooting was.
Yeah.
And she was doing a performance. I went with one of my good girlfriends, Gia Martinez, who's also a trans woman in Brooklyn doing amazing work. I was like, Gia, we need to go see Erica. And I went up to Erica. She gave this amazing, spectacular performance. She was this amazing performer and beauty queen. She won Miss International Queen in 2006. I ran up to her after the show. And this memory is always something that has stayed with me. I said, Erica, I love you. I admire you so much. I want to be like you when I grow up. I just started hormones 6 months ago. And what she did next has always stayed with me. She touched me with my face with the back of her hand. She said, oh, honey, you're going to be gorgeous. And it was such an affirmation. Sometimes you meet people who you admire, like famous people, and then you meet them in person and they don't live up to what your expectations, because we tend to put people on pedestals.
Yeah.
But it was so much better. And that moment taught me the power of representation,
Yeah.
to a point where 20 years later, I still talk about it and it still, like impacts me. When I was 18, I had the honor of working alongside Ariana Lind, who's this amazing trans Latina from Peru. We're both working at the health department in Orlando, Florida, as peer support educators for people newly diagnosed with HIV. We would help them navigate the healthcare system. And she was the first trans woman or trans person who I had a close relationship with, who I got to spend time with on a daily basis. And a lot of my activism is because of Ariana. She runs this amazing organization in Florida, and they also do some work here in Puerto Rico. Those were the two big influences in my early life, these trans Latinas. Then when I started my advocacy on Maria Roman, who run the Trans Latina Coalition, I got to meet them, and I had this huge admiration for Maria Roman since really young, because she was close friends with Erica. She was in the beauty queen scene. And a lot of my activism is dedicated to those trans Latinas who poured into me in my early years.
How important is representation, right?
Yeah, no, it's so important. But when we liberate ourselves, we unconsciously liberate the people around us.
Exactly. Well said. You've taken on major leadership roles. What personal experiences inspired you to become such a strong advocate for trans wellness and community support?
I had a really rough adolescence, childhood, and early adulthood. I was homeless. As I was a homeless teenage youth. I lost my job when I started transitioning. This was 20 years ago. I started doing sex work. I faced a lot of adversities. I slept in a shelter. I'd sleep in my car that I would park at a Walmart. And so I faced all these adversities. Sorry, my cat.
Oh,
Say hi, Sylvester.
Sylvester?
Yeah. There are so many moments in my life where near-death experiences where it's like, God really saved me at that point, And there's so many, stories of trans women who resonate with me because here in Puerto Rico, we had a case that got a lot of attention of Alexa Feliciano, which was a trans woman, a homeless trans woman. And I was Alexa at one point.
Mm-hmm.
I know what it's like to be homeless. I know what it's like to have to use public bathrooms because we all have a bathroom. And, there was that.
What was that?
Fireworks.
Fireworks? Oh my God. Like, I thought
it was the fireworks.
I thought it was like a gunshot. I'm like, oh shoot.
Yeah.
Funny.
That means the fireworks are for sale already.
That's funny. Oh my God, that scared me. Okay. Because I saw your face just.
No, I can tell the difference when it's not fireworks.
Oh, that's so funny. Okay.
So where was it? That's Puerto Rico being Puerto Rico. We're a very loud culture. What were we talking about?
You were talking about what you had to go through and you had to, be homeless and all that.
There was another case here in Puerto Rico, trans woman named Michelle Ramos Vargas. And her case really resonated with me because me and her were the same age. And really, of all the trans people who have been murdered in Puerto Rico in the last few years, none of them made it to my age. The vast majority of them died before the age of 30. And I think that's one of the things that we can't leave out when we talk about trans murders is that trans people who are being murdered systematically, they're being extinguished at the height of their youth. And so there's just so many instances where I could have been that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I carry, one could call it survivor's guilt, but I carry this immense responsibility because I also recognize that my existence is in large part due because there was generations of activists, who fought and in many cases gave their lives so that my story could even be a possibility.
Yeah.
I'm very well aware that even in 2025, even in just the Caribbean, like I don't even need to leave the Caribbean and talk about the other side of the world, just in the Caribbean. My story is not possible in Haiti. My story is not possible in Cuba. My story is not possible in Jamaica. There's so many trans women, it just, cis in my sister islands and the Antilles that, it's just there is no means for upward mobility, access to safety, access to healthcare, access to education. And so I carry a sense of responsibility to do everything in my power with the time I have on this earth to open up those doors for those coming after me.
Yeah, that's great too. Oh, that was so funny though. I really thought it was a gunshot.
No, normally when it's gunshots, you'll hear multiple.
Oh, I have to tell you something funny. Okay, we're in Mexico, me and my husband, we were boyfriends at the time. And then I can't remember, but there's a holiday where there's fireworks and all that. And then we're in a hotel room and then there's a firework. He freaks out and he jumps under the bed and he's like, go down, we're going to get killed. And for sure, he thought it was a gunshot. And I'm laughing. And then there's people walking in the hotel and he won't come out. And he's like freaking out and he's pulling me down. And then finally, it was a maid that walked by, and then I asked her to come in and tell him that it was just fireworks, but he freaked for sure. I mean, I don't know. I don't even think I've heard a real gunshot in my life. So For us, it was for sure. For him, it was like a real gunshot, but it was hysterical that he really thought he was gonna die. That was the end of his life. Okay.
I've had friends who visited who thought the same thing. I grew up, me and my dad and my brothers, we would go to the shooting range when we were younger because I grew up half the time in Florida. And in Florida, I remember my dad used to own a lot of guns. He still does. And when we were 13, he gifted us each a BB gun. And so when we were younger, we would like put the trash can upside down and put like soda cans, and we just on the side of the house just shoot with our BB guns cans. And that's what we would do. And like in Florida, you could go to flea markets and buy guns. And so I'm able to distinguish the difference between the sound of a gun and the sound of like a car, like the car pipe or fireworks.
See how like our culture is so different. Like, I mean, I don't think I've ever heard a gunshot, or I've never seen a gun in my life, but just on policemen with, in their pocket. For me, like, it's so scary to, like, just what you're saying.
No, you're
Uh,
absolutely right.
and it's freaking me out. Like, I don't know how I would react if, I would be in a country where there would be guns everywhere. Like, I would be, even now, I'm scared of going back to the US right now. Not just because of that, of course, with everything, because I always travel with my husband and our son. And it's important to me that if I go somewhere, they come with me. And now I'm like, well, you never know. You never know what could happen, because if the guns are so easily available on anyone, who knows
I'll
what
be
could
honest,
happen?
I feel more safe in Puerto Rico
Mm,
and it's not to say that we don't have violent crime, but the violent crime in Puerto Rico tends to be very personal. You know, it's either two gang members that, like they're shooting each other, or it's domestic violence, but it's not random. Like mass shootings don't happen in Puerto Rico.
yeah.
Like someone going into a supermarket and just shooting people,
Like,
or going to a church
yeah.
or school,
Or
or
yeah.
a concert, movie theater, like that doesn't happen here. But whenever I visit my family in Florida, I am hyper aware. Like when I take my niece to the movies every time we go, and I'm always paying attention. Where are the exits?
Oh,
When I go to the supermarket with my grandmother, I'm like, where are the exits? Where do we hide? If I go anywhere with my mom, I'm constantly thinking about that. And because it's random. It's random. Like here in Puerto Rico, it's like, as long as you're not in a domestic violent relationship or involved in drugs, only danger you have to worry about is being in the wrong place at the wrong time. There's like a stray bullet somewhere. Um, but of a madman just walking into a supermarket and just shooting people at random, that doesn't happen. Thank God.
um, and then you just talked about your family. May I ask how it is these days? Like how it is right now?
Oh, my family, they're great. They've had to go on their own journey.
Mm,
Mostly my mom in the beginning, because this is almost like 20 years later. So
mhm.
in the beginning, she had difficulty because, again, she had never known about trans or whatnot. Her first response was, that's expensive.
Oh,
She was more upset because I came out as trans a year after my mom caught me with a boyfriend while I was still in boy mode. So my mom, the intro, she thought I was gay.
mm,
And I didn't have the language or the heart to tell her, no, mom, I'm not gay. I'm actually a woman. And I'm transitioning because I knew that would be too much for her,
yeah.
And so at the time, I remember her saying, you don't need to change. I recognize that I need to change, but give me time. And I appreciate her communication at the time because she said, this is not something I planned for. This is
Mm,
not something you prepare yourself for. And she gave a good example of my younger brother. She said, as a mother, you prepare yourself for certain things, that your kids are going to go on, like grow up, they're going to get married, they're going to move out. She goes, but there's certain things you don't prepare for. She goes, when your younger brother passed away, had a brother who died. She goes, you don't prepare yourself for
No.
that. You don't expect that your kid is ever going to pass away,
Yeah.
before you. That goes against the laws of nature. And so, I had to adapt to a new reality. And she goes, so right now I'm recognizing that I have to adapt to a new reality. And so just give me time to adapt. And I remember one time, my nickname growing up was Jake. And I remember one time we were at the mall and she wanted to buy me a dress. It was like her way of showing, look, I'm making steps,
Wow.
And she pointed out a dress, like we were kind of like across the store from each other. And she's like, Jake, mira, and holding up a dress. And I remember seeing her face of horror the moment she said, like, Jake, just like she realized she kind of like fucked up. And so I just rolled with it. And I was like, Jake, your mother's looking for you.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. And so my mom has had to go on this journey. Today, she's a completely different woman from the woman who raised me. I joke about that because the woman who raised me was this very, very ultra religious conservative woman who didn't wear pants.
Wow.
And, I think part of it is that after she divorced my dad while I was a teenager, she started working more, didn't have as much time for church. And she got a lot of judgment for being a divorced woman for leaving my dad. And so I think she realized what it's like to be other. And my mom refused to internalize all the negative messaging about the LGBTQ community because she's like, I know my kid and I know they're not evil.
Mm-hmm.
And when I had my gender confirmation surgery, when I had bottom surgery, my mother was there. She changed my first diaper. When I competed the very first time in Panama, my mom was there. I have to say, like, my mom is everything. I love her so much. There's we don't talk enough about family acceptance as a public health issue.
Mm-hmm.
Trans people were at higher risk of contracting HIV, being murdered, being homeless, experiencing unemploymentness. And the one factor that has been proven to disrupt all of those variables is family acceptance.
Of course. It's the basic.
Mhm.
And may I ask another question
Yeah,
with
of
that?
course.
Because it seems like you had support from your mother and all that, but how did you end up living in the street?
So I'm a detransitioner. I left my house between the ages of 17 and 18, and I moved to South Florida because I knew that my mom wasn't going to be able to accept me transitioning.
Okay.
And like, I knew that at that time, she was very much like, I don't mind you being you, I accept you, but not in my house.
Okay.
That was her stance at that time. I remember we had a heart-to-heart moment where I told her, Mommy, you don't accept me. You tolerate me because I'm your kid and you feel as though you have no other option, but you don't accept me. Because acceptance would mean that I could bring my partner just like my brothers bring their partners over.
Yep.
And she said to me that her aha moment once was when I told her, Mommy, I tried. I really tried to be that son that you wanted, and I couldn't do it. And she said, I've been a witness to your whole life, and so I know you were telling me the truth. I moved to South Florida for my transition. I had been taking hormones for like 7 months clandestinely. And I just went out on my own and into this world. And, I wasn't ready. I got hit with the realities of the world. Every time I would take a step in affirming my identity, the world around me would push back.
Yeah.
At the time, there was a lot of policies within companies that wouldn't allow for different gender expressions. A lot of those policies we got removed because of the work activists like me and other trans activists have done. But, like any job, if you were male, you couldn't have your hair touch your collar. You couldn't paint your nails. You couldn't wear makeup. You couldn't have earrings. I lost my job and I just faced all these adversities. I attempted suicide. And then eventually I decided to move back home. And I remember I moved back home and my hair was long and I was in this androgynous stage. In Orlando, there's a lot of hotels. So I called all the hotels because I had hospitality experience. I asked if they were hiring and I asked for what positions. And I made a whole list of places that were hiring and for what positions. I asked my mom, like, Mom, after work, could you take me to go apply to some of these places? And I remember the first place I went, I had long hair, and I go in and I ask for an application. And the woman said that they weren't hiring, which I knew wasn't true because I called ahead. I spoke to HR. And I left, and my mom was in the car and she goes, "What happened?" I was like, "Mommy, that lady didn't even let me speak." I decided, to cut off my hair and to detransition. And it was the hardest decision I ever made. And so I was like that for 3 years between 20 and 23. And then I went to DC for a conference, for a HIV conference. And I read in an article that Washington, D.C. at the time was the city with the most progressive LGBTQ policies. And so I said, I'm going to move to D.C. And I did that. I planned. And then like 6 months later, I moved to DC. I gave my car to my younger brother. And I also just like a lot of, in Florida, my car insurance was really high. My car payment was really high. Gas was really expensive. I realized that like most of my income was going towards just having a vehicle. And I said, I'm never going to be able to invest in my transition if I'm living in Florida. And it's just the culture wouldn't allow it. So I just said, I'm going to go to DC. And I did. And I retook my transition immediately. And DC is great because it's the highest concentration of trans people in the United States. The laws, trans people are a protected class in Washington, D.C. So it adds a level of protection because if you get denied anything, you're not just, it's not just discrimination, but you're discriminating against a person that's a protected class. On the federal level here in the United States and Puerto Rico, because Puerto Rico's under U.S. jurisdiction, we're not protected in public accommodations and pretty much in a lot of different areas. There's a bill called the Equality Act that we've stopped talking about because of the current political climate. It would seek to protect us in all areas of life, not just trans people, but all LGBTQ people.
It's so interesting what you just shared because you had to do what you had to do to move forward. Sometimes you have to backtrack a little bit. You have to be safe, make yourself safe, and then restart to be who you want to be or do what you have to do.
Yeah.
Wow, that was really, I'm really happy. I was not too what's the word? Intruding? No, what's the word?
It's fine.
I was not too personal. Okay, because that was really excellent what you just shared. Okay. At just 27, you testified before the US Congress about violence against trans women. What did that moment mean to you, and how did it influence your voice as an activist?
I think it was 2015. Obama was president. The Equality Caucus of Congress, they decided to hold a hearing on trans violence because it was like 2 days before the International Trans Day of Remembrance. And I was asked by the National Center for Trans Equality if I would give testimony. And so I did. And I talked about how media and figures and politicians, how they often talk about trans people in a dehumanizing way, and how that foments the dehumanization, trans people that leads to ultimately violence on the street. And I call for the approval of the Equality Act. Again, this is one of those moments where I felt an enormous weight of responsibility because I knew that I was carrying into the space, thousands of voices of trans, women and men who, have lost their lives because of transphobic violence. And I myself am a survivor. And so it was one of those moments where I felt like a sense of responsibility. And there's also moments where, we're always, where you make history and at the time you don't realize it's history.
Yeah. So you never know. Yeah, you never know what you're
only years
doing.
later do you realize the magnitude of that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I was saying, is you never know what the thing you will be doing for others might even get so much bigger and help so much more than what you think. That's great. You represented Puerto Rico in Miss International Trends. How do you see the role of pageants and representation in uplifting trans women, especially trans women of color?
I come from Puerto Rico. I come from a country that's big into pageantry. So I grew up with that cultural background, but also the early women who made a big impact in my life were former beauty queens. I mentioned Erica Andrews, Maria Roman, but also within my family, we have beauty queens. My cousin, Cifredo, she's the national director of Miss Universe Puerto Rico, and she's also a former beauty queen. She's also one of my big inspirations. And so I've been surrounded a lot by these powerful women, and I really never saw myself competing. And it wasn't until I had a good girlfriend named Kaylee Whalen, who's this amazing trans woman activist, and that I had the opportunity of working with her for many years in DC. And she was in Southeast Asia recording stories of trans women, and the trans women in Thailand convinced her to compete in Miss International Queen, which is the largest pageant for trans women. And having known her and know that she's like the furthest thing from a pageant girl or pageant, beauty queen, because that's like not her arena. But she gave herself that opportunity to step in out of her comfort zone. And I was so inspired by her participation. I said, you know what? I want to do that. And at the time, my partner was like, that's a waste of money. Why would you want to do that? And I said, in what other context can I spend a week with amazing trans women from all over the world?
Yeah.
And it was such a beautiful experience. Last year I had the opportunity of representing Puerto Rico at Miss Star International, which is another one of the largest trans beauty pageants. It was held in Sao Paulo, Brazil. We had 30 candidates from all over the world, or 5 different continents. And we had this one night called Beyond the Crown where we all share our stories. We sit in a circle and we all take an opportunity to tell our stories. You would hear who had family acceptance, who didn't. You know, there was Miss Peru. She was a survivor of a hate crime that, she was left with bloodied. One of her breast implants had exploded in the attack. One of, Miss Colombia, she had to immigrate to Chile because it wasn't safe where she was living. Venezuela, she had to immigrate to Spain. And so you hear all these stories of resiliency of these women. And despite all that, they're happy, they're living their lives, they're full of energy. And so I walked away with not just, like 29 sisters from all over the world. I gained this huge sense of empowerment because trans people, we often live very interesting lives. And we have a lot of very interesting experiences. And when you hear the stories of trans people, like I feel as though, at least for me, I can't help but be inspired because I'm like, damn, if you survived all that and still came out on the other side, it just makes me feel like, well, if you did that, I can do this.
Yeah.
Like it makes you feel like, wow, like there is no limit to the human spirit, what we can achieve when we really, really want to do something. I have trans friends who they literally walked from Central America through Mexico and crossed the border into the United States, for an opportunity to actually be free as a trans person.
Yeah.
And, right now we're experiencing a retroceso, like a backtrack on
A back
trans rights. I get inspired by their resiliency and like what they've gone through, and that the fact that they are still here, they're still advocating, they're still smiling. You can't take away their joy, and just that is like a form of resistance.
Wow. Yes. Well, really well said. It's really just to hear you say all this, it's really inspiring me too. You speak openly about intersectionality, being trans, Latina, and from a working class background. How do these layers of identity shape the way you show up in your activism and in your everyday life?
So that's a it's a good question. It's a good question. I think because I hold so many identities, because those aren't the only identities I hold, being trans, being Latina, being Jewish, being like representing a bunch of different identities, it's a blessing in the sense that because I share a lot of identities with a lot of different kinds of people, I feel like I'm kin with a lot of different types of people from all over the world. And so, in having that kinship immediately by sharing an identity with someone who might be from a different country, culture, language, religion, but we share a commonality,
Mhm.
it has enriched my life and my worldview so much because I've been able to step in to the lenses and the shoes of many, many, many different kinds of people.
Yeah.
And so whenever I have the opportunity or privilege to lead a space, I'm able to think about who are we missing? Whose voices do we need to add to this conversation? And when we're looking at policy, I'm able to look at policy and think about how would this impact certain communities? How would this, how would the language in this bill be interpreted by society and by different communities? Because I also grew up in a religious black background. So I'm also able to see things through the lenses of religious fanatics because I grew up in a very, very religious conservative household. So I'm able to see like, how would this policy be interpreted? How could this be manipulated to discriminate? How could this possibly impact different communities that have different kinds of access or resources? And so I think that's one of the benefits of intersectionality and bringing and diversity and inclusion that now it's become taboo. But I think that's the beauty of diversity and inclusion is that when you have more people at the table and when you own all of the fullness of your own identity, because we all have intersectionalities, we all have, like, I have friends, you're a gay man, but you're also a father,
Yeah.
And so there's all these different kinds of intersections where you're able to see things not just as a gay man, but as a parent.
Yeah. For trans people, especially youth Latinas, who may feel unseen or unsupported, what message of strength, hope, and self acceptance would you want them to take away from your journey?
I don't want any girl to be like me. I want them to be themselves. Because I've had girls say, I want to be like you. No.
Well, yeah, well, wait a little bit. I love the music though. Oh, there you go.
Puerto Rico.
It's all great. Actually, if I close my eyes, I can see myself being there. And it's probably hot and warm right now, which is cold. It's cold here and it started snowing a few weeks ago. So I would like to be there.
Come. Yeah, sometimes I'll have neighbors just like yelling at each other, like not yelling in an aggressive way, just like,
Yeah.
calling them from inside the house, like, Pedro, come out. And I'm just like, I'm on a call, guys.
I think it's my time now. Yeah.
I have the honor of being a bridge in right now. I'm a millennial, I represent the greatest generation. And I'm at a point, I go to school, I'm a full-time student at the University of Puerto Rico. And so I spend my days with kids who are, or not kids, young people who are literally half my age. And I stand between, I'm older than my peers and younger than my professors.
Mhm.
So I sometimes feel like I'm a translator between two generations. The professors who don't always understand their students and the young people who don't always understand the professors. And in the LGBTQ community, and specifically the trans community, there's a lot of differences between the old school and the new school.
Yeah.
So like the younger kids, the younger LGBTQ people who are coming up, they don't always understand the elders. and the elders don't understand the youngins.
Mm-hmm.
And because I have had the opportunity throughout my life, and this is again about, when we embrace the fullness of our identities, we can become a better asset to our communities.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have been privileged in my life that I've been able to break bread with both and listen to both. So I'm
Right.
able to see things from different angles because of that. And I sometimes feel I'm like that translator, that bridge between those two generations. I think that's the role that millennials we have to occupy at this point, because our elders, they're not going to live forever. And this is not just true in the trans community, it's true across the board. Our elders are not going to live forever. And we learned that through the COVID pandemic, where we lost millions of people
Mm-hmm.
overnight, and or hundreds of thousands of people overnight. All that institutional knowledge, all that history, went away with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we don't sit down, and I tell this to my, I run an empowerment program at my university where I have 16 trans women who I've taught how to, I gave them media training. I've taught them how to testify, for a legislative body, how to draft an op-ed. I've explained how the legislative process works, how a proposal becomes a bill, all the tools within our arsenal as advocates to stand up for ourselves and defend our rights and our community. And so I tell my girls the stories of these older trans women who you may not understand.
Mm-hmm.
That's your inheritance as a young queer person, as a young trans person. When they go, all that history goes along with them. And you will be doing a disservice to yourself, because yes, the elders, they don't have the same language that we do. They don't have the same analysis that we might have. They see things from a completely different world perspective because they survive different things.
Yep.
And they've experienced traumas that we cannot even fathom. I've talked to elders who told me about, the countless friends they lost during the AIDS crisis,
Mm-hmm.
at the height of the AIDS epidemic. And one trans woman told me that they got assaulted on the stroll while they were working. They said they were held at gunpoint. They were obligated to strip naked on the stroll. And one of her friends was shot, and they took their clothes, and she died within her, in her arms. And those traumas are the traumas that they sit with,
Mm-hmm.
And I tell the girls everything that we're going through right now, because I often feel like because the generations don't speak with each other, it's created this idea where young people think they're the most oppressed generation in history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I say to them, you're not going through anything that previous generations have not gone through.
Mm-hmm.
And so you will be doing a disservice to yourself if you just say, oh, what do they know? They don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
You'll be doing a disservice to yourself, because when you hear their stories of resilience and how they've overcome, you feel a sense of empowerment, because you say, if grandma went through that, I can go through this.
Yeah.
If grandma went through that and came out on the other end, I can go through this and come out on the other end.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's incumbent upon us as millennials to be that voice, that really we're the ones that have to record that history of our elders so that the next generation can know what came before. Because that's the story of our elders is the story of our community.
Yeah. So we all have to educate ourselves so much.
Yeah. I said earlier, I feel like a large sense of responsibility. Come from a small island. Pedro Albizu Campos, who was one of our founding, fathers of Puerto Rico, he said that it is the responsibility of every Boricua, every Puerto Rican, to be the most cultured, best version of themselves. I'm paraphrasing because it was from Spanish. Because we're a small nation, depend on the greatness of every individual.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is true of us as trans people. I say we are a small group of people. We're not, people perceive us to be much more in numbers than we really are, especially trans women. We're a very small population relatively to the, to population at large. And so I tell my girls that it's incumbent upon us to be the best versions of ourselves. And yes, we have to face adversity. And yet, despite the adversity that we face, we can still overcome. There's still possibility. And is it fair that we have to be excellent and exceptional in everything? Because we have no alternative. We cannot, in the midst of all this that's being thrown at us, we cannot allow them to win. I have moments where I cry, where I feel weak, where I feel like I can't go on because I'm just trying to be, I'm going to college. I have 2 jobs. I'm just trying to move forward. And there's a lot of uncertainty. I'm studying to be an English teacher. And I'm like, when I graduate, will that even be a profession that I'm allowed to do? Will I even be allowed to work with young people? Because that's where we're heading. I want to be a mom in a few years. I want to adopt. By the time I'm ready, is that even going to be a possibility? Will I even be able to get married? Like, there's all these kind of like uncertainties, that weigh on you and weigh on me, but we have no other choice than to be exceptional, because to do otherwise would be to let our haters win.
Yeah.
And so we have to process our trauma on the go, and because the traumas that we experience are on a daily basis. Oftentimes when we talk about like bullying, for example, we're talking about experiences that happened 20 years ago. But every time there's a trans woman is murdered and we wake up to that news, that's a trauma, because I'm constantly thinking about the day that, one of my sisters or one of my girls, like I get that call, and then in the midst of my grief, I have to fundraise for her funeral, and organize a vigil. And that's something that we hold, and it's not fair. It's not fair. When I was young, I used to think that being trans was like a curse. As I've grown up, I've come to realize it's a blessing. It's the biggest blessing that God gave me. Hold on, look. All right. So I've come to realize that being trans is like the biggest blessing that God gave me, because being trans has made me kin with the most amazing people I've walked this earth. If it wasn't for my transness, I wouldn't be talking with you right now.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the girls who I've come in contact with, they're in that early stages where their families don't accept them, where they have to hide their girl clothes and stuff. They have to go into boy mode whenever they go to visit their families. And so sometimes they don't see that light at the end of the tunnel, and they see me and they want to be me because they're seeing the finished product. They're not seeing all the work and everything I had to go through to become the person I am today. And that's why it's important for us as, elders to tell our stories. My advice to the trans kids who are coming up is that sit down, give yourself the opportunity to sit down and connect with elders. Get some trans parents, get some trans moms in your life, get some trans grandparents in your life. Even while young people who have the love and support of their parents, your biological parents cannot teach you how to navigate the world as a trans person. This is why trans mothers are so important. Your biological parents, they can love you, but they can't teach you the resiliency that's required to navigate the world in a trans body. And so I think that biological parents and trans parents, they need to come in tandem when raising young trans people so that they can really own their transness and understand that this world in many spaces is not here for us. We need to be prepared for that. And we need to understand that the landscape is not fair. The challenges we're going to face are not fair. We need to acknowledge that it's unfair. But despite that, we can still overcome and we can still carve out a space in this world for us and achieve our goals and achieve our dreams that we have set out for. You know, when you told me that, you and your husband and your child, I was like, goals, And so when I hear that that's your reality, I know that if it's your reality, it can be also my reality.
Yeah, because when I was a kid, that was one of my biggest dream. Like I remember from being such a young age, and I used to dream of, being married and having my own family. But at the time, I was way too young, so I thought it would be with a woman. But and then the time went on, and then it was like, oh no, you can't even think about that. And then so when it started becoming the feeling of, okay, yeah, now I'm allowed, and I saw it, and I'm lucky that we're allowed here to do that. And every day, every morning, the minute I go kiss my boy good morning and kiss my husband good morning, it's like every day is like such a wow moment. The first time that I took my son to a kid garden, and I'm walking in and I'm looking at all the other dads and mom, and I just started bawling like, my God, I'm allowed. I'm finally living, allowed to be who I am and being a dad. So yes, like you say, representation, we need to be out there so much. What you're doing is incredible. You're showing other people to show them that they're allowed to be, that we're all allowed to be who we are, and the resilience you have, and what you just shared today. You're inspiring me so much. So I'm sure you're inspiring a lot of people. Thank you so much. It was great meeting you. It's been a long time. I was we're both really busy, and I congratulations on being in school, and it's great. My husband just finished at 40 something his degree at university, went back, so I know how hard it is. I went back to school many times too, even a few years ago for me. So I totally understand. Congratulations for that and for everything you do. And hopefully, if I go to Puerto Rico, for sure, I'll let you know. And hopefully, I'll meet you one day. But it was so nice
Yes.
having you. Thank you so much.
Montreal's on my bucket list, but it's gonna have to wait till summertime because I
Yeah.
don't like dealing with colds.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you would, if you would survive that. It's really hard for us already. Like January and February is horrible. But
Yeah.
um,
Well, if you need to break from the winter, just come
yes,
down.
yes, that would be great. But thank you so much again. In today's episode, Joanna reminded us of three powerful truths. First, that embracing your LGBTQ identity is not weakness, but a source of pride and resilience. Second, that representation and intergenerational wisdom save lives, especially within trans communities. And finally, that even in the face of trauma, loss, and systemic barriers, our stories can become tools for change. This conversation is a reminder that living authentically is not just personal, it's political, powerful, and deeply transformative. I'm always looking for inspiring guests for the podcast. I'd love to have you or someone you know share your journey with pride. The world needs your story. It has the power to change lives, and your voice matters. Please reach out and send me an email today. It's already time to say au revoir just for now. So please join me every Monday and Thursday for brand new episodes of the Together Moving Forward podcast and learn how to embrace your true LGBTQIA plus identity with pride through self love. If you enjoy this podcast, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode on how to love and respect yourself. And if you found this episode useful, share it with a friend or someone you know in our 2S LGBTQIA plus community. so you can help them embrace self love. It might seem like a small gesture, but it truly makes a huge difference. Wherever you're from in the world, we are all connected. Remember, solidarity beats hate. The more we unite, the stronger we become. Because at the end of the day, we are all equally human and we all deserve the same rights. One last thing before I go, put your hand on your heart and repeat after me. Yes, you and me together. I create my own definition of success and happiness. Yep, I create my own definition of success and happiness. From shame, guilt, silence, and rejection, to pride, freedom, healing, and love, together moving forward. Thank you so much for being here with me today and for sharing this journey of growth and love. I truly appreciate you. See you real soon. Ciao. Subscribe now and share to uplift, empower, and make a real difference in our community.